Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive.
Right.
So you've sent in some really interesting stuff lately about how we learn, and specifically, there's this one document, Learning from Learning Kits, gStudy traces of students' self-regulated engagements with computerized content. And it got us thinking,
Hmm.
we should do a deep dive on this,
Hmm.
really explore how technology can give us this unique window into the learning process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when we're talking about self-regulated learning, how students take control of their own education. It's like moving beyond just what they're learning and getting into the nitty-gritty of how they learn.
Yeah, exactly. And when you talk about the how, you're talking about self-regulated learning or SRL, right? And it's kind of like a recipe, I guess you could say,
Okay.
with these key ingredients. And researchers, guys like Zimmerman back in 1990 and Wynne and Perry in the early 2000s, they really nailed down these core elements.
Okay, so SRL, self-regulated learning. Let's break it down. What are these ingredients?
Right. So, like, the first one is this metacognitive aspect. It's all about learners, being aware of their own strengths and weaknesses, what works for them, what doesn't. They understand what resources they have, how to use them to tackle a challenge. It's basically like knowing yourself as a learner, right?
Right.
Eh,
So knowing if you're someone who learns better by, I don't know, reading or actually doing something, and then choosing activities that play to those strengths.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the next big ingredient?
So the next one is motivation.
Uh-huh.
Self-regulated learners, they really believe that they can get better, that their abilities can grow. It's not fixed. It's what we call incremental ability.
Okay.
And they really care about understanding the stuff, not just getting a grade.
Yeah.
And they have this strong sense of, I can do this, high learning efficacy,
Okay.
and they take responsibility for their learning.
Right. So less about natural talent and more about believing you can learn, owning your learning journey.
Yeah.
I get that. What about the last piece?
All right, so the last one's a strategic part. They've got this whole toolkit of tactics and strategies, right?
Okay.
But the real key is knowing which tool to use for the job, how to combine them effectively for a winning learning strategy.
Right. So we're talking about someone who's self-aware, driven, and knows how to use different learning techniques. But, this document you sent, it points out this big obstacle in actually studying SRL, especially when we rely on what students tell us themselves.
Absolutely. For a long time, we've been relying on self-report data like surveys and questionnaires.
Yeah.
Learners tell us about their learning. And while it gives us some clues, it's not always the most reliable. Wynne and Jamison Knoll, they pointed this out way back, and Perry too, especially for younger learners.
What makes it so unreliable, especially for kids?
Well, for one, memory. Can they actually remember everything they did? And then there's this thing called social desirability bias. Are they telling us what they think they should be doing instead of what they actually did? And then there's the issue of calibration. A kid might think they've totally got it, but then their performance shows otherwise. And with younger learners, it's even harder because they might not be able to really explain their thinking. Turner did some interesting work on this too.
Okay, so we can't just take their word for it, especially with younger kids. Makes sense. So what's the alternative? The document talks about this idea of trace data. What's that all about?
So trace data, it's about capturing what learners are actually doing, but in a way that doesn't mess with their learning.
Okay.
Think of it like digital footprints as they work. We're not asking them what they did, we're seeing it.
I see. So it's like a digital log of their learning journey, kind of?
Yeah, you got it. It's happening in real time, so we bypass that whole memory bias thing. We see the sequence of their actions, how they interact with the material.
Right, so we're getting closer to how they're actually thinking, not just what they tell us after the fact. Sounds like a big step forward. Now, this document, it mentions the Wynne-Hadwin model of SRL. You kind of touched on it before, but can we unpack those 4 phases a bit more? What do they tell us about how students learn?
Sure. This Wynne-Hadwin model from Wynne and his colleagues, it's a real framework for understanding how self-regulated learning works.
Okay.
It breaks it down into 4 phases, and the learners, they kind of cycle through them.
Right. So phase 1, what's happening there?
Phase 1 is all about defining the task. Learners are figuring out what's expected of them. They're looking at the task conditions, like how much time they have, what resources are available, any support they might get. Like if you've got a week to write a research paper and you can use the library's online databases, those are your task conditions.
Gotcha. So it's like understanding the ground rules of the learning situation.
Right.
What else goes into defining the task?
They also think about cognitive conditions.
Hmm.
This is about their existing knowledge, past experiences with similar tasks, and what strategies worked before. Like, if you've struggled with statistics in the past, that's going to influence how you approach learning a new statistical method.
Right. You're bringing all your past learning to the table to make sense of the new challenge. Makes sense. What about phase two?
All right, so phase two is setting goals and plans.
Okay.
They've figured out the task. Now they set goals. What do they want to achieve? Maybe it's mastering a skill, getting a good grade, understanding a tough concept. And based on those goals, they pick specific tactics and strategies they think will get them there. So if your goal is to really understand a historical period, you might plan to read primary sources, take notes, maybe join online discussions.
So it's like you've got the lay of the land. Now you're mapping out your route.
Yeah.
Okay. What about phase three?
Phase three is where the action happens. It's called applying studying tactics. They're actually engaging with the material now. And as they learn their knowledge and beliefs, they start to change. Maybe they realize, hey, I'm getting this, or maybe this strategy isn't working. It's all about adjusting on the fly.
So it's not just following the plan. It's also realizing when the plan needs to change.
Exactly.
Which takes us to phase four, right?
Yeah.
Making adaptations.
You got it. So in phase four, they look at what they've learned, the notes they've taken, maybe a draft of something, and they compare it to a benchmark, maybe their own understanding feedback they got, or the requirements of the task. And based on that, they decide stick with the plan, tweak it a bit, or even start over. It's what we call a recursive process, meaning these updates, they can feed back into any of the earlier phases.
Recursive. Okay. So it's not a straight line. It's more of a continuous loop of checking and adjusting.
Yeah.
That's self-regulation in a nutshell, I guess. Now, the document also talks about Perry's work on tasks that are, especially good for this kind of learning. What makes those tasks stand out?
Perry's research says complex tasks. That's where SRL shines. Not the simple stuff, but the challenging, multi-layered things. They often have multiple goals, lots of information to process, and you need a deep understanding to solve them. Think about a project where you research a scientific problem, analyze data, propose a solution.
Okay, so not just remembering a fact or following a set of instructions.
Right, exactly.
What else makes a task complex in a way that encourages SRL?
These tasks, they usually take time to complete, not just one sitting. And they need learners to use different cognitive processes, which can lead to different outcomes. Because these tasks are more demanding, they make students think about their learning metacognitive thinking and pick the best strategies. They have more freedom in how they tackle it.
So the tougher the task, the more chances students have to really regulate their learning.
That's an interesting link.
Now, you mentioned before that metacognitive monitoring and control, they're at the heart of SRL.
Yeah.
And this document, it really emphasizes that. Can you break down those two concepts, what they actually mean in the context of self-regulated learning?
Absolutely. Monitoring, at its core, it's like checking your progress against some standard. Are you understanding this? Are you on track?
Okay, so it's taking stock.
Yeah.
But what makes it metacognitive monitoring?
Metacognitive monitoring, it's not just about the answers, it's about the quality of your understanding, the learning itself. The document gives this great example. Knowing the difference between an atom and a molecule, that's about the subject. But asking, is my definition of an atom correct? That's metacognitive.
Oh, okay.
You're thinking about the quality of your knowledge and judging if you really understand the difference after studying. That's metacognitive monitoring of a learning event.
Right, so it's thinking about how you're thinking, not just what you're thinking about. And then metacognitive control, that's what you do with that awareness.
Exactly. It's the so what? You've monitored, now what? Do you keep going, change something, or ditch it completely? It's about making decisions based on what you've learned about your own learning.
Okay, so if you realize you're not getting something, the control part is deciding to reread or try a different technique. So all of this background on SRL brings us to this Learning Kit project and this gStudy software. What is gStudy and what does it do?
The Learning Kit project, it was created to tackle the challenges in studying and supporting SRL. gStudy, it's this cool software that does two things. It delivers instruction through these learning kits, and it's a research tool to study SRL.
So it's like a digital learning space that's also collecting data on how students use it. What kind of data?
It collects time-stamped trace data on how students engage with the materials and the tools within those kits, like a super detailed log of everything they do.
Gotcha. The document gets into some of the gStudy tools. Let's go through a few. First up, notes. How does note-taking in gStudy give us insights?
In gStudy, when a student takes notes, they usually start by selecting some content. Could be text, a picture, part of a video, and they create a note linked to that selection.
Okay.
What's neat is gStudy can use note templates. Say they're working on a debate. There might be a template with sections for main argument, supporting evidence, and counter argument.
So it's not just like free-form note-taking. The templates provide structure. How does this help us understand SRL?
Right. When they create a note, link it to content, or use a template, gStudy logs it all with the time. We can see if they use certain templates a lot, maybe it tells us how they're approaching the material, or if they change a template, maybe it wasn't working for them. And linking notes to content shows us how they're connecting ideas. It's a sign they're really engaging with the content.
So it's not just the notes themselves, it's the whole process. What about the labels tool? How does that fit in?
The labels tool, it lets learners categorize stuff in a way that makes sense to them. They make their own labels like key concept or example or don't get this.
So it's a way for them to organize the information, make it their own.
Exactly. And when they label something, gStudy records it, the label, the content, the time, shows us their thought process, how they're making sense of things.
Okay, so labels show us their organizational skills, how they connect the dots. What about the glossary tool?
With the glossary, students can find and define key terms. Like notes, they often select a term and fill in a template with a definition, maybe an example sentence.
How does that tell us about their self-regulated learning?
When they take the time to make a glossary entry, it shows they get that this term's important. And using a template, it tells us about how they're structuring their understanding.
Right, they're building their vocabulary and understanding the core concepts. Next, the index tool. How does that work?
The index tool, it helps learners create their own index and link terms to specific spots in the kit. gStudy can even auto-generate a basic index from the glossary, but the learner has to make the connections.
So it's about linking the vocabulary to the actual content. What does that tell us about their SRL?
Indexing, especially when they do it manually, shows they're actively thinking about and connecting new information. Elaborative rehearsal, we call it. And they know when this deeper processing is helpful. Plus, they can link index terms to notes or even outside resources, showing us their strategy.
So many tools that encourage students to really think about what they're learning. Now, what about concept maps? They sound like a powerful visual tool.
Concept maps in gStudy are visual, with nodes for concepts and links for relationships. What's cool is everything a learner creates, notes, glossary entries, labels, can be a node in the map.
Oh, wow.
They can also build their own maps from scratch, with each node becoming a new object in gStudy. And gStudy logs every single action on the map, creating, moving, connecting nodes. So we can see how they're processing the information, how their thinking is evolving as they build the map.
It's like watching their understanding take shape.
Yeah.
What about the search tool? How does that play into self-regulated learning?
The search in gStudy, it's not your basic keyword search. They can get specific, use keywords, filter by resource type, even date created. So how they design their search, that tells us a lot. What are they looking for? What's important to them at that moment? gStudy keeps track of all their searches, and we can see their information-seeking strategies.
It's like their search history becomes a window into their thought process. They're actively trying to fill in the gaps. That's self-regulation in action. Right. Now, what about this guided chat and structured collaboration? How does gStudy handle that?
gStudy has tools for both live chats and working together over time.
Okay.
For chats, it often gives students roles like questioner or summarizer, and it gives them prompts to guide the conversation. There might even be a shared concept map to connect the ideas visually.
So the chat itself is structured to give us data on how they're participating, how they're thinking together.
Yeah, and for asynchronous work, they can share their learning kits and the objects they've created, like notes and maps. Before sharing, they can label things and use task templates to show what each object means for the task. Again, concept maps can be used to show how the different pieces of information fit together. All of this is saved as trace data, so we can see how they're regulating their learning individually and as a group.
gStudy is like making the invisible visible, right? We're learning so much here. The document also mentions coaching features in gStudy. Tell us about those.
gStudy has two main types of coaching built in. One is called Gliza, kind of like that old ELIZA computer program. It has a sort of conversation with the learner, prompting them to think about different study tactics and things that might affect their learning and collaboration.
So like a virtual study buddy, helping them reflect on their approach.
Yeah, exactly. And the other type of coaching is an expert system, which is a more advanced health system. It watches how the learner interacts with glyza and all the other trace data, and then gives them personalized prompts based on what it sees. It might suggest better ways to approach the task based on their behavior in the system.
So a more tailored coaching experience.
Yeah.
And all of this is captured as data.
Right. All the conversations with glyza and the expert system are saved, so the learner and the researchers can go back and analyze those interactions.
Amazing. Finally, the document mentions a log analyzer. What is that, and what does it do with all this data?
The log analyzer is where researchers, teachers, even students can dive into the nitty-gritty details of how they interacted with the learning kit. It's super detailed, down to the exact time they highlighted a piece of text, what they highlighted, where it was, everything.
Wow, that's a lot of information. What can you do with all that?
Learners can use it to understand their own habits, like how much do I highlight? Do I review highlighted stuff? What kind of notes am I taking? And for researchers, it's a goldmine. They can find patterns in study activities, see what strategies work best, understand how learning processes lead to knowledge gains. They're even using advanced techniques like graph theory and Bayesian networks to uncover the hidden patterns.
gStudy sounds like a really powerful tool for understanding how learning happens. Now, to bring it all together, the document talks about a life cycles learning kit, specifically about frogs for like first and second graders. What does that look like in practice?
This life cycles kit, it came from watching real kids working on complex tasks in the classroom. It has interactive text about frogs, from eggs to tadpoles to adults, their needs, the dangers they face, and teachers can choose which content to focus on.
And it's not just reading, right? There are activities too.
Right. There are supplemental tasks like keeping an observation log, making concept maps of the life cycle, comparing frogs to humans, even writing stories. They can use outside resources like web links, and there's a glossary link to the text, and they can even link glossary terms to their own notes.
Okay, let's say a student is learning about frog eggs. What might they do, and what kind of trace data would we get?
Okay, so they open the section on frog eggs. It has text, pictures, maybe videos. Even their navigation choices, which pages they view, are recorded as data. Glossary terms are highlighted in the text. If they click on one, let's say eggs, gStudy logs that they access the definition. There might be a more button for more details, and if they click that, it's logged too.
And what about those do you know quizzes? How do those contribute to the data?
Those are great for seeing how well they're monitoring their own understanding. Let's say there's a multiple choice question about the jelly around the eggs. Their answer, how confident they feel about it, and if they ask for hints or reread the text, it's all recorded, along with the time they spend on each step. Tells us a lot about how they handle difficulty.
So every click, every choice is valuable data. What about the observation log, where they might be looking at real tadpoles?
For that, they usually use a note template. Like, there might be a template for describing tadpoles, what they look like, their gills, their legs. When they fill that out, it shows us what they're focusing on. And gStudy can track if they borrow text from the learning kit for their notes, or if they link their notes to the original texts.
Okay.
It shows how they connect their observations to the provided information.
This linking thing, it's like a theme in gStudy, right? Showing how they make connections between different parts of their learning. What about the concept mapping task, where they have to show the frog life cycle?
When they create a concept map, every action is recorded, creating nodes, labeling them, connecting them. And if they go back to the text or their notes to check something, that's captured too. So we see how they gather and organize information to build their understanding.
And lastly, the compare and contrast task, where they're looking at frogs and humans.
They might use a template for this, comparing and contrasting different features. gStudy tracks everything they do in that template and what other materials they consult. It gives us a detailed picture of their thought process as they analyze and synthesize the information.
It's really amazing how much we can learn about the learning process itself just by tracking those digital interactions. So to wrap this up, it seems like gStudy and these learning kits, they're really valuable tools for going beyond just measuring what kids learn, to actually understanding how they learn.
I totally agree. The real takeaway here is the power of trace data. It gives us a much clearer, more objective picture of learning as it happens, not just after the fact. We can see how students are actively thinking, making decisions, using strategies, and adjusting their approach as they learn.
And this research is still going strong, right?
Yeah.
The document mentions some interesting future directions.
Yeah, definitely. The researchers want to get even better at analyzing these patterns of study tactics to really understand what makes a learning strategy effective.
Hmm.
And they're working on ways to define and measure these patterns in all this data. And of course, they're constantly developing and testing new learning kits.
It's really exciting to think about how this research could change how we design learning environments in the future. So for you, dear listener, here's a thought. Could these methods of tracking learning be used in other areas beyond just school?
Hmm.
Maybe even in your own life? Think about how you learn a new skill or dive into a complex topic. Could you benefit from being more aware of your own trace data, how you approach things, what works for you, what doesn't?
That's a great point. Paying attention to how you learn is a huge step towards becoming a better learner. We really encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, see what you discover about yourself.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of self-regulated learning and gStudy. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did. Until next time, happy learning, everyone.